So week 3, we've been in our series, and we've talked about standing out in week 1, standing up in week 2, and this is week 3, standing strong. And we're talking about stories of courage out of the book of Daniel, and we've started this whole series basically just thinking about how Daniel would go, but really it has a lot of truth for our present day and age, because Daniel lived in a time that rivals ours as far as being evil, as far as being governments that are corrupt, and people that were in a dog-eat-dog society. That's really where we're at. And we started off in this series by telling you this basic premise that if you take a stand, whether you're standing out, standing up, standing strong, and in the next 2 weeks we're going to talk about standing in and standing firm, but if you take a stand for the right things, at the right times, in the right ways, for the right reasons, then it can change the course and direction of your life. And that's really what you see modeled out in the life of Daniel, a guy where everything was going wrong for him. You think about it. Everything was going wrong because at the age of 14, 15 years old, his family's executed in front of him. He's ripped out of his home, out of what his comfort zone is, into a culture that's so different language. His name's changed. His diet was tried to be changed, and we talked about that in week 1. And it took a lot of courage for Daniel to stand out. That's what we found in chapter number 1. Standing out isn't always easy because you can stand out for the wrong reasons, in the wrong ways at the wrong times. And the other problem is sometimes we like to, the opposite of taking a stand, we like to compromise. And compromise, if we compromise on the wrong things at the wrong times for the wrong reason, it can cost you more than you can ever imagine. And that's where we find some of the things that we know are true in our lives. younger people. That is something that's quite old. I saw a rerun the other day of that. George Jefferson, I'm moving on up to the east side. No, the problem with that is what looks like a promotion on the outside actually introduces a lot of trouble on the inside. That's the problem. See, what you have to see here is that those 120 guys that are under him, and then the other 2 guys who are somewhat equal to him, they didn't like that. They were jealous of him. They hated him. They didn't like what was going on, and so they begin to plot. They are the sinisters of our story. They are the evil people of our story. They began to scheme, to plot. They were in this dog-eat-dog world, and they were still doing what their culture had told them to do. Hey, if it's necessary to get that guy's job, do something so underhanded that you can do away with him. And so they start thinking these things through. And what happens is they decide they're going to take Daniel down. Thus, we're going to talk about this lion's den down the road. But I want you to know, the question that we're still trying to understand here, that we're trying to answer today is, how do you stand strong in the face of overwhelming circumstances, evil circumstances? Because that's all this is. And that's where we find, I believe in this passage, we find 3 truths that will help us, help you and me, to be able to stand strong. We've talked about standing out. We've talked about standing up. Now we want to stand strong. 3 truths in Daniel chapter 6 that we want to look at. Number 1, if you're following along with me, number 1, when God raises you up, expect people to tear you down. Now, most of us are like, I know that. No, I think we don't really understand that in the way Daniel would explain it to you, because he's got a different whole story here. See, when you're looking into the book of Daniel, you have to realize Daniel is doing things the right way. I'm not saying Daniel's perfect. What I'm saying is Daniel had distinguished himself to make it a pattern in his life to follow God with every choice he made. In fact, he had pre-decided a lot of his choices so he wouldn't get into bad situations. He was faithful to God, such a faithfulness, and I want you to see as we go through this, I want you to pay attention as we read some of these verses down the road about the faithfulness that other people are going to talk about Daniel. But what we have a problem with in our mind is going like, hey, I'm serving God, came to church today, why am I having problems? That's the problem we have. See, I don't understand when I go to church and I give my offering and I serve God and I volunteer here and I do all these things, I don't understand why God might give me problems at my work. Daniel could have said that, couldn't he? Problems at my work. God, I've been doing what you asked me to do, because we don't always understand that when God raises you up, we need to expect people to tear you down. That's what happens. You see, the actual truth is people are controlled, and the reason this happens, people are controlled by an enemy that is far greater than anybody you can see. He is. The Bible tells us that we are a part of God's, if you're a Christ follower, you're part of God's kingdom, and that there's another kingdom that opposes us, kingdom of darkness. In fact, the Apostle Paul was clear to tell us that we don't fight against people, not flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers that are unseen, realms of darkness. The demon world is controlled by Satan and his own crowd, and he's been at it for a long time now. He really has, and that's what Daniel's having to fight here. In fact, if we realize this in Daniel chapter 6, you keep going in the passage, verses 4 and 5, it says this, at this, so he's being promoted, at this the administrators, that is the other 2 guys, and the satraps, the 120 guys, tried to find what? Grounds for charges. Now, when you read that, you're like, hey, that's not cool. No, grounds for charges, as in charges to have him executed, charges to do away with his life. This is some serious opposition. This isn't just like somebody's complaining about me. This is someone's trying to kill me. Daniel, we want to take your job, but we want to really just take your life because it's a whole lot easier to do that. So they're looking for grounds to charge against Daniel in what? In his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Why? Because Daniel had predetermined a lot of things in his life. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. I like that. Some of us were like, I just didn't know. Daniel was not. Daniel was a no excuse guy. That's what it's telling us here. He wasn't negligent. He was always on the mark. He was always following the rules. In verse 5, it goes on to say, they couldn't find anything, so what are they going to do? Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel. Oh, isn't that cool? Never. We'll never find anything that we can point a finger on. We'll never find anything we can blame him for. Daniel is such an upright guy. He's not cheating on his taxes. He's not going a mile over the speed limit and saying it's okay as long as I don't get caught. He's not stealing a pencil and going, hey, it's not really stealing, I'm just borrowing for long term. He's not doing any of that. They had no basis to charge this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. The weakness they thought was Daniel's greatest strength. And Daniel here, he's got to stand strong in what area? The area of his God. And Daniel, just like you and I, he realizes he's not a good guy. He's only good because of the God he serves. He's not good because he's something. Daniel repeated that over and over again as he's asked to interpret dreams. He always made it clear, I don't interpret dreams. God gives it to me, and I'm just a mouthpiece. It's God who we should honor. Daniel never took credit for himself, and that was going to be a hard thing. You know, my mom and dad lived, my dad pastored a church on the Outer Banks of North Carolina for several years, and they lived over in Kill Devil Hills. That's a mouthful to say. It's a good thing to say, though, Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina. And we lived on the backside of the island, the Sandbar Island, and we lived in a community, a gated community that sounds so much better than it is. It was just normal houses. But it had, one of the cool things, it had inlets for your boats, if you had a boat. We didn't have a boat. But it had a place where if you owned a boat, you could park it right at your house. It was just really cool to do. We didn't have a boat. But what we did have is I had a line, a triangle, and some frozen chicken wings. And that spells crab fishing. Now, if you've never done crab fishing is just so fun. Even if you don't like crabs to eat, they're just fun to do. You can throw them back. It's cool. But you take the chicken wing, frozen chicken wing, you put it on this triangle contraption so it stays on there, and you tie the string to it, and then you begin to lower that string down into the water on the side. And before long, you're going to start feeling little pulls. And then you slowly, and I mean, you've got to be slow and steady at it. You start pulling. Now, if you want to keep the crabs, you better have somebody with a net by you too, and a bucket. But you start pulling that up. And what you will find is you will have a bunch of crabs, depending on how big they are, a bunch of crabs on this frozen chicken wing. They're trying to get to it, meet it, and you can pull them and put them into the bucket. And I used to love to do that, even though my mom would be like, get rid of those. I'm not cooking those things for you. I would put them in this bucket. And here's what I learned about crabs. Crabs are the most selfish people. They're just like most adults. They are. Why? Because just like these guys wanted to tear Daniel down as God promoted them, crabs like to do that with each other. See, what you would see in this bucket, one crab would start trying to make a way out of the bucket. I might even give him a little help by putting something where he can climb on it. And as soon as he got somewhere near the top, you know those other crabs, you know what they would do? They'd reach up with their claws and they would grab hold of him and they would pull him back. It was almost like they were saying, no, you're not getting out of here. You get back in here. And I never really had to restrain the crabs. The crabs did it for themselves. They had a problem with each other. And that's the picture you have here of these guys. They are so trying to pull Daniel down to their level. They are just pulling and pulling. And that's what the world does to us. It reaches out and it grabs hold of us. And Satan is controlling the world system we're in and the people around us, and he's using them to tear us down. And God's trying to lift us up. And when we see this, what we have to realize is that if you're not ready to face opposition for your obedience to God, then you're not really ready to be used by God. See, Daniel had to realize, hey, you know what? I'm going to get promoted by God, but there's going to be someone there to try and tear me down. And if you're not ready for it, Daniel was ready. If you're not ready, though, for the opposition to your obedience to God, then you're not really ready to be used by God. I know so many Christians, they're so surprised when things come in their life, and they're like, oh, hey, you know what? Let me help you out. Jesus said it this way. In the world, you will have tribulation. He said that. Did you know that? It's a promise he made to us. Isn't that great? Write that down as one of your number one promises. Nobody's doing that. Why are you not writing that down? Because we don't like that promise, do we? Because what Jesus is saying is, as I promote you, as I use you, as I give you ministry to do, you know what the world's going to do to you? Like crabs, it's going to grab hold of you and try and tear you down. They're going to try and pick you apart. And if you're not ready for the opposition for your obedience of your obedience to God, then you're not ready to be used by God. And you know why? Because so many of us, we thought it was going to be a rose bed. We thought everything was going to be easy in our life. We didn't see the problems in our relationships. We didn't see the problems in our homes. We didn't see the problems coming. And some of it, yeah, I get, we don't see them. But we never expect them either. And Jesus said, hey, don't worry. In this world, you're going to have tribulation. But he doesn't stop there, because he says, but be of good cheer, because I have overcome the world. And that's the greatest part of it. Daniel knew that. And that was way before Jesus ever said that. Daniel understood, hey, you know what? I've been doing this for 80-some years. You know what's going to happen? As I get promoted, people are coming after me. It's a dog-eat-dog world. That's the first truth. Number two, we see this. Kneeling to pray is what gives you the strength to stand. How did Daniel stand? Kneeling to pray is what gives you the strength to stand. So what did Daniel do? These men, and for time's sake, we're going to cut through some of this. These men get together and they said, hey, the only way we're going to find fault in Daniel is through the law of his God. So what do? They started noticing the habits of Daniel. Daniel had a habit that he prayed. Just like every good Orthodox Jew will do, they will pray 3 times a day. Morning, afternoon, and evening prayers. That's what they do. That's the system. In fact, we talked about that last Sunday night in our Bible study in the book of Acts. It's a pattern. And so Daniel is doing what he's supposed to do. He's facing Jerusalem. He's praying to the God of his fathers, his ancestors, and he's praying, God, help me in this time. And they notice it, and he's doing it with such regularity. You could probably set your time, if they had a time watch to set, you could set your sundial to Daniel, because he does that in such regularity. And they thought, we got him now. So what happens? These 2 administrators who are equals with him, the 120 under him, they plot. They come up with the good, because they're used to doing this. This is how their society worked. Get it through the underhanded way. So when they get together with the king, and hey king, you're looking good. You look like you lost some weight. Man, is your hair glowing or what? I mean, you look radiant today, king. And they butter him up, and then they say, you know what, king? We think it would be good, because you're such an awesome king. If for the next 30 days, no one would pray to any god or anything else, because there's a lot of things they pray to. Nobody prayed to anybody else except for you, because you're the greatest king. And you know, the king, just like most kings, he was a little bit overwhelmed with the flattery. He liked it. Kings are proud. He liked for people to tell him how great he was. And so the king sat back without too much thought, and he said, sounds good to me. Signed it into being. And now we're into the land of the Medes and the Persians. It's law, and in the land of the Medes and the Persians, the law cannot be overturned, even by the king. Even the king doesn't have the power to overturn his own law. That's such a crazy thing. And so we pick up, and what we find here in this story as we move forward is Daniel's got 3 choices. He does. Daniel's got 3 choices. Number 1, he can stop praying. You know? Wouldn't it be easy? Hey, it's only 30 days. Some of us would do this route. And I don't know who, but some of us would sit back and go, hey, you know what? It's only 30 days. It's a law. I'm just going to back off. 30 days. 30 days without prayer. Hey, you know what? God would rather have me alive at the end of 30 days than pray and lose my life, wouldn't he? I mean, that's how we would think. So we would sort of like, you know, I'm going to take a break from God for 30 days. It won't be a big deal to God. God's eternal anyway. And see, we're reasoning things out. That's option 1. Option 2 is Daniel could have said, you know what? I'm going to fake it. What do you mean? Pray silently. You know, nobody has to know. Nobody has to know. I'm just going to sort of hide in the crowd. You know, we sit down for our meals and everybody else is like just going ahead and praying to Darius the king or whatever they're doing. I'm just going to sit there and act like I got something in my throat for a couple seconds and say my silent prayers, and nobody will be the wiser. I'm going to fake it. That'd be option 2. That might be the easiest thing. That's probably what I would do, be honest, if I'm honest. Or option 3 is the Daniel option. I'm just going to keep praying and let God bless me. I'm just going to keep doing it. Because why? Because Daniel's faith in God was strong. It says in verse 10 here, it says, now when Daniel learned, I don't want you to think that Daniel was ignorant. Daniel knew what was going on. Now when Daniel learned that the decree, that is the decree to not pray to anyone other than the king for 30 days, had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. And what did he do? It says there that he prayed. He prayed. He prayed. That's what he did. See, our first response to the problems should never be to panic, but always to prayer. And that's what Daniel learned. Our first response, it shouldn't be like, let me see if I can figure this thing out. That's my response, isn't it? It's probably most of ours. Hey, the power went out the other night, and I got to figure out, do I get a generator? Oh, yeah, I guess we could pray. There's nothing else to do. Let's pray. And that's how we treat God sometimes. That wasn't how Daniel treated God, though. See, Daniel's first response to his problems, how did he stand strong? His first response to problems was never to panic, but always prayer. There are people that, you say the word COVID, and they're like, oh! And they run for the shelters, and they're running and hide, and they're thinking, I can avoid it, I can do whatever, and you know what? Your first response is wrong. Stop panicking, start praying. Why don't we pray? You know the reason why we don't pray? Because we don't believe the power of the God who we're praying to. Daniel did. And that's why he could stand strong. Daniel, are you kidding me? Daniel, he gets up and he prays. He, 3 times a day, he gets down on his knees and he prays. He prays, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. Just as he had done before. Daniel, how in the world can you overcome these? They're going to put you in a lion's den. Now, for most of us, the lions probably we've seen at the zoo, right? I, on the other hand, have seen lions up close and personal many times. Been on trips to Africa, and I can sit here and tell you about them. I was as close. I was sitting on the edge of my tent, and I saw a lioness. Actually, the lioness are the ones that do the hunting. The lioness was about as far as Donnie is to me. Licking her lips, too. I'm like, dude, the other guys I was with, I just want to see how fast they could run about then, because I just knew I don't have to be faster than everybody. I just have to be faster than one of them, because I don't want to be eaten. And I remember there was a guard standing there, and the guard, all he has is a stick. And I say a stick, not even a long one. I'm like, so you're protecting me from that? He's like, yep. I said, we're going to die. We're going to die. No, my prayer life got a lot better that night. It really did. I'm serious. You get so close to some of the animals out there, and they're not behind cages. They're not behind screens. They're not. I mean, they are there, and they're not even tamed, somewhat tamed, as in used to being around people. I've been ambushed by baboons, and that, I tell you, they're scary. You don't think they are. Those baboons will tear your arms off easily. Just scary, some of the things I've been around, and especially my stupidity, because I didn't know we were not supposed to do some of the things. They took our lunch one day. Took our lunch. You don't think baboons are scary. Actually, baboons, especially for little babies. I think of the young babies around here. If you lived in Africa, you'd be always on the lookout for baboons. Why? Because baboons will steal babies out of the windows, because there's no glass in windows there, and they'll eat them. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Daniel, you're going to get put in with lions that haven't eaten in days. What would you do? I think I'd be worried. I'd probably have some anxiety. I'd probably be not wanting to sleep at night. That's the honest truth. And Daniel, he didn't need anything to help him sleep. He didn't need any sleep aids. Daniel was comfortable because his first step, his first response to the problems of his life, and those are some serious problems with some serious big claws and teeth, wasn't to panic. He didn't have to figure out how can he prove himself right. Daniel never does any of those things. Daniel stands on his own integrity, but Daniel always has to Daniel. The other thing I like about Daniel when you read this in verse 10 there, he just does business as usual. He doesn't do anything different. Daniel doesn't, hey, in our age, you know what we do? Is I don't have my phone on me. We whip out our cell phone. We go onto TikTok. We go onto Twitter. We go onto Facebook. We go onto Instagram. And we'd be putting pictures of ourselves on there. And we'd be like, I'm going to pray now. And it'd be hashtag I'm so spiritual, right? Hashtag I'm so spiritual, getting ready to pray, praying for my life. And we'd put stuff like that. Daniel didn't do it. Remember, Daniel learned how to do standing out in the right way in chapter 1. And then he learned how to stand up for himself, for God, stand up to the king. So he didn't have any problem just sitting back saying, you know what, prayer is where I need to go, because he knew that he could come boldly to the throne of grace whenever he needed to. Daniel knew this. See, what's great about Daniel is back in chapter 1, Daniel, when he pre-decided not to eat things that were wrong, he didn't just pre-decide one thing in his life. Daniel had made his life full of pre-decisions. And these pre-decisions that we've been talking about have led him to the point where when he has a problem in his life, he doesn't panic, he prays. He pre-decided, when I go into problems in my life, I'm not going to go crazy town. I'm not going to act like my hair's on fire. I'm not going to go and rant, rave, and spit and shout on social media. I am going to pray to the only person that can circumstances, and that is God Almighty. How many times do you do that? It's tough. We rant, we rave about everybody else, how this person's handling that. We've had people ranting and raving about vaccines or not vaccines. Go to God and pray about it. Stop ranting and raving on social media. Amen? Come on. Let's stop getting on the Democrats and stop getting on the Republicans and start getting on God's side and saying, God, we face overwhelming problems in our life, and you are the only hope we have. Don't panic. Midterm elections coming up. You know what I got to say about that? Vote. Vote whatever you think you should vote. Vote the way God tells you to vote in His Word. But if it doesn't come out the way you want, don't go crazy town going, the world's over, everyone cheated, I'm losing everything, because you're not, as long as you trust in God. That's what Daniel's telling us here. If I want to stand strong, the first step is getting on my knees in prayer. See, the way I look at it is, if our churches, the altars at our churches were full, then maybe some of the problems in our lives wouldn't be so big. That's just how it is. Notice how Daniel prayed too. He knelt before God in prayer. He knelt before God in prayer. How did he stand so strong? Daniel stood strong before men because he knelt before God. And the more we kneel before God, and that's the habit we've gotten out of. I tell you this, if Maple Springs is going to flourish, we as people of God need to get down on our hands and knees before God Almighty and thank Him for every blessing He's given, thank Him for every problem He's created, and praise Him for every outcome that He is in control of. Because it's not you, not me. Which leads us to our third and final aspect. Number 3, when you do what's right, and Daniel did, you can always trust God with the results. I don't believe the night before Daniel stayed up all night worrying whether he was going to be cat food or not. I don't think he was worried one bit. I think Daniel was just the biggest picture of serenity as they lower him down into this lion's den. Daniel, you know what? Daniel knew, hey, when life gives you something that knocks you down, simply go seek God in prayer. When life gives you more than you can stand, kneel before Him in prayer, and He'll give you the strength to stand. And so Daniel really doesn't have a big deal here. He didn't sit back and go, I wonder what's going to happen if the lions eat me. You know? And I think this is something you need to understand too as we look at this. When you do what's right, you can always trust God with the results. Here's what you have to realize is nothing there is no guarantee that nothing bad is ever going to happen to you. There is no guarantee that you're not going to walk through life and not have something bad. Hey, it's great that we can celebrate God's answering our prayers, but sometimes God answers our prayers by giving you what you don't want. You don't control God. God is sovereign. And he might do things you don't want to do. I think that was the point of our Sunday school lesson this morning. He might just make you go to Nineveh. He might just make you go in a way you don't want to go. And you say, well, that's not fair. It's more than fair. It's grace. That's what it is. Because if it was fair, we'd be burning in hell right now. That's just the truth. See, the opportunity that Daniel understood is, hey, I've been here for 80 years. I've been in a place I didn't want to be with people I don't really like, who don't like me, but I'm going to continue to do what's right, and I'm going to trust God with the results, even when they try to get me in the wrong ways. See, what's great about this is you know how the story ends. Daniel didn't. You realize that, right? You know that he's going to make it out of the lion's den. Daniel gets lowered in. He doesn't know that. He knows the God who's in control, though, and he trusts him with the results. See, either way, if God saves me, great. If God doesn't save me, great. Because it's all the same, and that's one of the points that we see throughout this book of courage. How do you stand strong? You got to trust God with the results. Hey, you know what? There are people still hunkering down from COVID. You know? It blows our theology, doesn't it? Because we want a God who only gives us good things, right? But what's to say in your life that cancer might not be good for you? Oh. You say that, and I'm sure it sounds so callous because I don't have cancer. I know that says that. But you know what? Any of the problems I've had, what I had to realize is God's given them to me because he had a purpose for those things. And I may not like him, but I can trust him for the results that he's going to put in my life. Can you? 80 years, God's been faithful to Daniel. Do you think that made a difference in Daniel's life? Absolutely. See, in Daniel's mind, at 80 years, God's been faithful to me to let me live a life that I excelled because I trusted him with the results. And now I'm getting lowered into a lion's den, and guess what? I can probably trust God in the middle of a lion's den too. I can probably trust God through my deepest problems. If he saves me, I'll trust him. If he doesn't save me, I'm still going to trust him. That's the bottom line. And if you sit back and watch this story and you read it, what you're going to find out is Darius, this king, he is so enamored. And you got to realize he's the new guy on the block. Daniel and him don't have a deep, long history. He comes in and right away he's enamored with this guy Daniel because he's got integrity, because he's doing all the things the right way, for the right reasons, at the right times. So King Darius, he's devastated. The first thing he does is he tries to figure out how he can overturn this law, which he can't. He realized he's been tricked, and so he spends the night. The Bible tells us he spends the night up worrying all night, because that's what people who don't know God do. He didn't know if he could trust God because he didn't know God. Maybe that's one of your issues. If you don't know you can trust God, maybe you don't know God. He spends all night not eating, worrying, and he gets up the next morning. And remember, he doesn't know. And this is what's great. I don't know if you ever thought about this. We don't know actually what happened in that lion's den that night. There's a lot of let's speculate this, speculate that. We don't know what happened. But you know what we do know? We know it didn't happen. The lions did not eat Daniel. We don't know exactly, I remember all the flannel graph stories. They showed Daniel laying down, and he's laying on the side of this big lion thing. I don't know if that happened or not. The Bible doesn't tell us that. But I know one thing, that Daniel didn't get eaten that night. Daniel made it through the night. And the first thing in the morning, this king gets up and he runs to the lion's den, and he has the stone taken off, and he's sitting there going, Daniel, 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 are you there, Daniel? Did your God rescue you? In fact, notice, if everybody's look at this. This is so good. In Daniel chapter 6, verse 20. It says, when he came near the den, that is King Darius, when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. An ungodly king who had no reason to like Daniel at all loves Daniel. And this is what he says. Notice what he says, verse 20. Daniel, servant of the living God. Wow. Has your God, whom you serve continually. You might want to underline that, highlight it. Whom you serve continually. Whom you serve continually. Has your God been able to rescue you from the lions? Isn't that amazing? Daniel's great identifier is not the fact that Daniel dressed sharply, Daniel could speak eloquently, Daniel could do all these other great things. No, whom you serve continually. Daniel, the greatest mark in your life is that you're a servant of God, that you trust God with the results. Are you able? Has your God? Because I'm not sure, because I don't know him. You just see Daniel smiling there, saying, calm down. Calm down, King. I'm here. It's good. Daniel had a reputation that was proven to be a loyal servant of God to an evil king in an evil place. What do your coworkers think of you? What do the people who are non-Christians in your life think about you? Mean? Opinionated? Gossip? Complainer? Or servant of God? Isn't that what we're supposed to be known for? Daniel answers in verse 22 and 23. I love this. This is what Daniel says. My God, my God, my God. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of lions, and they have not hurt me. Why? Because I was found innocent in his sight. And it doesn't matter what you think of me. It matters what God thinks of me. That's what he's saying there. And then he says, just to make sure I'm not being rude, because he's doing it the right way, he says, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. He honored both God and king without compromise. He stood strong. The Bible says in verse 23, the king was overjoyed. The king was overjoyed. The most evil man on the planet at this time was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because why? Because he was a great guy? Nope. Because he had trusted. He had trusted in his God. He had trusted in his God. Full faith and confidence in God. That's it. That's the bottom line. What happens to those other guys? Hey, the two other administrators and the 120, you know what happens to them? Not because Daniel did this, because Daniel didn't do bad things. The king, who was an evil king, he realized right and wrong. He took all those guys, their homes, their families, their kids, their little dogs, their rabbits, their gerbils, and everything else, and says, you know what, it's feeding time at the zoo. Puts them in the lion's den, and they get torn to shreds. And I think it broke Daniel. I really do. I think it broke Daniel's heart. Because I don't think Daniel wanted that to happen at all. But Daniel had left a lasting image in an evil empire of what it's like to trust God under bad circumstances and stand strong for him. And what you and I need to know today is this one final truth. Kneeling to pray gives you the strength to stand. Kneeling to pray gives you the strength to stand.